We know what kind of thing we are. And we're working on the relation between us and the things outside us. That's what you mean by that, right? Consciousness is another word for it.
Yeah, that's what it doesn't have.
And it doesn't have that. Do you agree with that, John?
Yes.
Yeah.
ChatGPT doesn't have a sense of self. It doesn't have a model of its own interaction, of its own inner workings. And that's where language comes in from our perspective.
How do we tell that we have that? I use some adjectives to describe artificial intelligence. I'll explain why just for a minute, and then we're going to talk to these two great people. We seem now to have made something that seems terribly like us. It changes things, if that's true. It is true that they seem like us and will seem more like us. What that means is profound. In an immediate sense, it raises a big question, for a college, and that is artificial intelligence can write your papers for you. What the defenders of that kind of practice say is, well, it will only write drafts, but it's in the draft where you do most of your learning because you have to look at a whole bunch of stuff and learn what's not relevant. If something just serves up to you a draft, what about the stuff it excluded? How will you ever learn that? How will you learn what is the principle of exclusion and inclusion in a paper? In a college, you find out that writing a paper is really difficult, and that's why it's good to do it. If it gets easier, you won't learn as much. We think we can handle that around here because you have to sign the honor code, and we're working on it. We don't want to exclude it simply, but whenever it compromises the learning of the student, we do very much want to exclude it and think we can. After all, the kids come here to grow. If you tell them it'll stunt your growth, then they have an interest in not doing it, whatever the timetable pressure of getting the paper done may be. So there's that, but that's a little thing. The bigger things are the ones I stated, and we're going to talk about all of the little things and the big things. John Seifert is the founding head of our computer science program, which is already overwhelmed with applications, and we're looking for more. He's a great man and an experienced teacher and scholar of computer science and with a specialty in artificial intelligence. Jordan Wells is a theologian. He's an errant and interesting man. Errant, I say, because he set out to get a PhD in Oxford in artificial intelligence, and then he diverted himself because he learned he didn't know what intelligence was. Not too hard to know what artificial means. It just means anything we make. But what's intelligence? That's the big question. So he went and got a PhD in theology at Notre Dame, and he writes and teaches that, but also very much about artificial intelligence. So, gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you.
Thank you very much. Good
What
to be here.
is artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence refers a lot of times to two things. One's a philosophical project that tries to mathematicize what is mind and what is our relationship to the real in a way that's a continuation of the project that Plato started back in the Republic. Most people think of artificial intelligence in terms of the engineering project. That's the one that gets the funding. That's the one that makes English professors worry if the papers are from their students. And that one is, how do we make something that is mind-like? We typically don't worry about the word intelligence in the engineering side. We say that we have a bunch of systems in the world that the word intelligence applies to. And so if we can make a machine that is like those, that can operate in complex environments, then that's the goal. That will tell us something more about ourselves.
Computer guy. What would you say it is?
Well, I would tend to agree with what John has said. From my preparation and my area of expertise in early and medieval theology, I'm particularly interested in the sorts of intelligence that they considered and what that might say for us today. And so I like this distinction between the engineering project and the philosophical project. The engineering project is bound by deliverables. My undergraduate major was in engineering, and when you're specifying, it's very important to specify the engineering problem that one sets out to solve. And that means that the solution that these intelligent systems are offering is a solution that's bounded within what we can measure in the material world. We want to make systems that work, as John said. And so where I become sometimes wary concerning artificial intelligence is when that word remains too uninterrogated, and we can lapse into a sense that intelligence is the skill, the capacity to solve problems that I am able easily to define, and that can rapidly become also problems that will make me money if I solve them. And so the scope of the problem-solving intelligence that arises from these engineering projects is rarely the kind of person-like thing that you see in a 1980s movie being cooked up in a friendly scientist's basement, but is directed toward the solution of particular and monetizable problem sets. And so it's very important to not simply draw our sense of intelligence from what the engineering project can yield, but also attend to this philosophical, and I would argue also theological project of construing the deepest meaning of intelligence as we operate as human beings in the world.
Okay. Can anybody tell these guys are academics? I can. I love them for it. Let's start with something people are likely to know. What exactly is ChatGPT doing when it answers your questions or writes you a poem or writes your paper for you? How does it do it? What's it do? Later, I'm going to ask you to distinguish that from what we do, if you can.
ChatGPT is designed to predict what the next word in a sentence will be that will be pleasing to a human. So it's a big box of statistics. It has a bunch of probabilities. It looks at the words. It's been trained, which means that it has been basically searching the space of all possible computers that can interact with language. The thing that characterizes an artificial intelligence approach from a handcrafted approach is that in AI, what we program the computer to do is basically come up with its own solution to a problem. So the answer to how ChatGPT does it is it's a bunch of calculations happening, and it found out those calculations by the search that we programmed into it, or that OpenAI programmed into it.
So I get a bunch of email, and I don't like email, nobody does, but I like it better than text. And the reason I like it better is that it's easy to give it to somebody else to work on, and text is harder. And I infinitely prefer to state my answer to my computer and let it type it for me. Quicker, doesn't control your body posture as much. If you got to type, you got to do this. I've noticed that's getting infinitely better now. And I'm told that that's happening because of artificial intelligence. And what you're saying is what it's doing is it knows what I said, and it predicts the next thing, as well as just hearing what I say. And in other words, it's doing a statistical calculation. Not so much what I'm positing the distinction now. See, I'm an academic too. I'm suggesting what the distinction might be. When we hear each other talk, we're divining the meaning of it. And we like to talk to the people the best, whose meaning is clear to us. What they're doing is something different. What the computer is doing, it's looking at all the things everybody said so far as it can know them, and it's predicting based on what's said so far. And I think now maybe it might be reading my messages to understand context. So in other words, it's like the great Grace, who often reads my email because many of them come to her. It's thinking about so is that right? Is that what it's doing? It's
A little more than that. It's been trained with humans, giving it feedback on what it generates. So it's not just pattern matching what it has seen, but it's also it's been interacting with human beings who say, is this a good sentence or is this a bad sentence?
so how's that different from a child, say the most impressive child on earth right now, my granddaughter, learning to talk? How is that different from what she's doing?
I think it's not that different in some sense, but profoundly different in another. And so the way ChatGPT is trained, as Dr. Cipher pointed out, is on these large bases of texts, these large collections of texts to predict the next word based on the words it's seen before. And so it develops a sort of statistical model of the landscape, the contours of human textual self-expression. And when children are listening to people babble, or not when children are babbling, rather, they start babbling as an instinct, but based also on what they're hearing, at least as I understand it. And so they babble with an accent. They babble with the accent of their parents' language and of what they've picked up of the intonations that people speak with. And so initially, it really is the production of sounds and the kind of sound and the shape of sound that follows this previous sort of sound. And then they begin to learn words. And there's an interesting shift that happens in child language development that at first they're kind of piling up patterns that they've heard. And I've noticed this. I noticed this in my own children when they were 2 and 3, that the way they spoke really did seem to be assembled out of phrases they'd heard commonly from me and my wife. There were certain words that they would only use in combination with other words, and I recognized in them characteristic phrases that my wife would use that they had broken down and repurposed. And then children go through a stage of grammatical hyperregularization. And this is where the children are beginning to police their own language. They're not just drawing forth fragments of phrases that they've already heard. And this is why they begin to apply grammatical rules and conjugation rules far more strictly than they actually exist in English. And they have that kind of characteristically, they use ed for the past tense for every single verb, even if they were correctly using the past tense of a verb earlier in life. And so this is a stage that the ChatGPT doesn't have. It doesn't. It's not looking for the rules. It's developing a sensibility. It's attuning a palate. It's tuning its reflexes, so to speak. But there isn't there's not a stage above that of wondering, what am I saying, and am I saying it correctly? There's not that kind of learning. And then additionally,
I want to mention here, you guys both talk a lot about internalization. That means that we know we're a thing. We know what kind of thing we are. And we're working on the relation between us and the things outside us. That's what you mean by that, right? Consciousness is another word for it.
Yeah, that's what it doesn't have.
And it doesn't have that. Do you agree with that, John?
Yes.
Yeah.
ChatGPT doesn't have a sense of self. It doesn't have a model of its own interaction, of its own inner workings. And that's where language comes in from our perspective.
How do we tell that we have that? By the way, I have to mention, because eventually they may watch this thing, that my granddaughter has a brother. And I'm not talking about him as much because he's just starting to talk. And he's becoming extreme. It's in my own experience, raising children and now grandchildren, that's when they become extremely interesting. Because when they say a word, even when they babble in our intonations, they're telling you something about their insides. And they seem to be doing it willfully. That is to say, they choose to do it. And that's extremely charming. It's just absolutely captivating to me. It was with our own children, and we have boxer dogs in my family. So I got my first one before I got married, even. And we like them because they're stupid, and they do learn to live with us. And, the ones we got right now are the worst we've ever had. We got two young, strong boxers, a male and a female, at the same time because we had an untimely death of one. And they've been awful, right? But they're getting better now. But they're not indicating they can't say why they're getting better or that they're getting better. And there's no hint of communication from them about that, although they've always been, just like a little child, torn between the immediate thing they want and what they think we want. And now what we want is becoming more important to them. They're better accustomed to it, let's say. That's all you get, right? Whereas the little ones, the human children, why? And then whatever you say in response to the question, why can't I do that? Why must I do this? That will soon be used in another context, for or against you. So they are manifesting. Is that the difference we're talking about now? That they're not conscious of themselves. Is that the decisive thing?
Yeah, I think consciousness of oneself, if by that, well, what you said earlier, the sense of being a certain kind of thing, and not only being a certain kind of thing in this kind of naive sense of just my experience making up my identity, but that at a certain point in human development, human beings begin to wonder about themselves and about others, and they want to be better. There's an interesting shift I've noticed in my own children, that in first grade, in second grade, they come home with amazing stories of their feats on the recess field, but they're always accidents. It's always, I was running and I turned around and I just happened to cough and I lifted my hand and the football landed right in my hand. And so these are stories of how amazingly wonderful things converge around them. But by fifth grade, they want to say, I got 3 touchdowns at recess. And they don't want to claim it's an accident.
I see.
This is a matter of cultivated skill. They, as persons, as someones, are standing in relation to their sense of what humans can do. That's a kind of naive sense of human nature, right? And they want to be better versions of that. And they're excited about it. Whereas younger children are excited about, and I don't know if any of these stories are true, of the football just happening to land in their hand or the sled flipping upside down, but they're still wonderstruck by their environment. But at a certain stage, a child becomes wonderstruck by being a person, being a human. And this leads to different sorts of grandiose stories.
That gives them, so that means that if, let's just use ChatGPT. It's the one everybody knows. And it's the fastest growing computer program since the Stone Age. It's only superlatives are used about that thing. There's a journalist that I like a lot named Holman Jenkins, and he writes in the Wall Street Journal. He's a recluse. I hardly know him. I don't know if anybody else does either, but he's very smart. You should read him. Everybody should read him. And he mentioned about, he's a very analytical man, and he uses ChatGPT, or he uses AI. He didn't name the brand name. He's a journalist, maybe that's why. But he says it's useful. And that gave me license to use it for a search. And it was good. It was useful. It's not as fast as the regular search engines. And, I've used it 4 or 5 times. Sometimes it's stupid. You can tell. Sometimes it's, oh yeah, that's what I wanted to know. So there's accomplishment there. but it doesn't know what it is. And then the implication would be it cannot therefore strive to become a better one of it on its own. And I want to emphasize that. I think we may be close to the heart of it there. We know what things are. We know what kind of things are. And that just dawns on us at some point. We don't know what point. We know about when we began to be able to say it. To my granddaughter, my name is Baba. I got my name early, and that's an honor. Not Mama and Dada, that's faster, but Baba is third, as best I can remember. And so that I wear that like a badge of honor. But then the other grandfather became Baba Fred. I was a kind of thing now, kind of a demotion, but also a revelation of an understanding in her. And then there's a picture of that great Sam Connect painting, Sam Connect, our colleague in the art department, retired now, alas, but he's still around, so I still work him. He painted the signing of the Constitution. You can find it on the Hillsdale College website. It is the best of those paintings because it's the truest to the actual scene, which is what he set out for anyway. I love that thing. And it hangs over my fireplace in my study. And my granddaughter, the squink we call her, pointed at it one day. And she said, "Founding Babas." So now an old man is a Baba. And an old man is a kind of thing, not any particular one. So she's seeing something in all of us old men that's different from the individual characteristics of us that's in us. Aristotle says that's how we talk. Now, artificial intelligence can talk, but it's doing it differently. Somehow, you're saying. So explain that a little more, please.
Oh, well, yeah, I'd say the difference is that it is not speaking with reference to a world that it's in. At least the various forms of GPT are not. GPT is at best like a half-asleep sociopathic child that you wake up in the middle of the night and ask them a question and they'll spit back, something coherent. And I say sociopathic because, of course, it has no intrinsic
At a certain age,
ethical sense or conscience of its own.
Are not all children sociopathic?
Some,
at a certain age.
At a certain age, yeah. But it has no. It's unlike us because we are always more than the statistical landscape of stuff we've heard. We'll try things like that on for size. We're very shaped by our environments, but there's always a way in which we can transcend the environment, although it turns out to be harder than we might think it is. So that's one sense. And then the other sense in which it's not doing what we do is that it's not referring to anything. It's just saying what comes next. It's perhaps... I'll just leave it at that. John, what are your thoughts?
It's not clear that we want our tools to have a sense of self. So the fact that ChatGPT isn't necessarily a drawback to its utility. And it does have some sort of model. You're talking about your granddaughter modeling the world and using the term Baba to describe different objects in it. And as a large language model, it's doing that writ large with language, but it's not expressing that to us because it has no need to. It's just doing its thermostat-like job as a calculator for words to aid us in accessing large bodies of knowledge. It's a great interface to like a huge library of information.
So this utility, it's a good idea probably for us to distinguish that. We're going to talk about some ways in which there's great danger in this thing, but there is great utility in it. You can, and see, we're all working people. My kind of job means lots of things going on all the time, and one needs time to think too, especially if you teach, which I do. And so everything that saves time is gold to me. I love it. And so the utility of this is it can do things for you and really fast and cheaply. And that's good. You can do more with it. So don't, and it is the fastest growing software program since the Stone Age. And after that, the records are sparse. Before that, the records are sparse. So this is good, right? And also suggests it can't be stopped. Talk about the dangers of it. Are there dangers? What are they?
Well, I'd agree with the second more so than the first. Because it's useful means, yes, it can't be stopped because it's the companies, the next level agents doing the technological advances. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. 100 years ago, we switched over from artisan craftsmen making our things to assembly lines. And that was more efficient, it was more productive, but it changed how humans were in the world. Instead of having the furniture in your house made by the craftsman down the road and having that person have that job, we now have a different relationship and a different arrangement. So if we care about human flourishing, and here at Hillsdale, I think we do, the kinds of dangers that we want to look at with artificial intelligence are similar to other sorts of industrial automation type dangers. What jobs remain? Are they jobs that are human, that will lead to human flourishing? Just because something's more efficient doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add something to that. I think of the introduction of gas-powered lawnmowers and automatic dishwashers into the suburban household. At the time, in the 1950s and the early 60s, I used to like to look at a lot of old magazines when I was in fifth grade, and they were stacked up on the windowsill. So I saw a lot of these advertisements and little articles, and the way these things were pitched, the marketing for dishwashers and lawnmowers was often that now you'll have more time to play with the children. Now you'll have more time for, it would show the dishwasher humming along in the background, and the woman is painting a landscape as she looks out the window, and the kids are playing outside, and the man sets aside the lawnmower and is reading, some doubtless great work of literature. That it turned out that everybody just watched a lot of TV, and they, at least in the 70s, it seems like they weren't so happy out in the suburbs with their dishwashers and lawnmowers and televisions. So I think maybe what that points to is that sometimes when we make certain tasks easier for ourselves, we believe that will leave us time for other pursuits, that will leave us time for higher pursuits that feel more fully human. And maybe there's the possibility that some of these tasks that we want to get out of the way are actually part of what sustains not just our humanity, but it also sustains our ability to engage fruitfully in those higher things. So I'm not saying we should get rid of our dishwashers and our lawnmowers, but if the end product of the lawnmower is that now I need a ride-on mower because I have a bigger lawn, but by the time I'm finished with the bigger lawn, I don't really want to do something so taxing as reading. So I just go, watch a television program that may or may not be good and feel dissatisfied afterwards because it wasn't that great, but it was what was available at the time. And one wonders whether maybe, pushing the mower on a small lawn was somehow contributing in a way that is hard to quantify, at least contributing to a culture in which painting a landscape or reading a good book made sense to people at the time.
I see.
So if we take out the drudgery, maybe we discover that the drudgery is part of what also gave us access to the higher things. And if we take out the drudgery and replace it with ease, then maybe instead of the higher things, we look also for ease there as well. And everything converges to the middle.
So
Maybe.
in that sense, it might cripple us. There's a crazy guy who works in my office who is a very fine young man, actually. He's a Marine, out of the Marine Corps now. And he and another guy started a school out in Kansas. And in the school, it's all boys, the school. Everybody has to farm. Everybody has to learn Latin. And he wants us to start a school like that. Probably won't. But when he gets to talking about the virtues of that, it is persuasive. And we've got a couple of the graduates of that school in this college now, and they're doing fine. They like to cut wood, and they like to hunt things, and they like to grow things, and know what makes a thing grow. And according to the classics, is its soul. It wants to grow. Ours is like that, more like that. Anyway, but so I have to reformulate. They want to know how you help it grow. What can we do to make its growth easier for it, better for it? So yeah, that's in other words, this tendency to cripple us that's what the first worry in our college is that college has to involve struggle. We try to help them through that, but that's only after we have imposed the struggle. There's a big hardcore curriculum here, and people are flocking to computer science now that we've got it, and that's hard. And they do know that they need that here. They've chosen it. And then after the struggle is underway, then you help them. And that's because the effort is theirs, and they need everybody else to help them. So that could go away, right? It could isolate us. You could, I was at I've fallen into the clutches of the Mayo Clinic because a bunch of doctors from there sent their kids here. And the big cardiologist, I won't say his name, is father to 3 of the smartest young women I've ever met. And they're going on to great things from here. And he worked my heart over lately. And it's good. I'm okay. And then he showed me, as a lark, that they have built an artificial intelligence thing to analyze an EKG. Now, this guy can analyze an EKG in his sleep, but he showed me that, and the EKG divined that there's a 99.6% chance that I'm a male. I said, okay, very, very perceptive. He said, yeah, and he said, if you do a transplant, for about 6 months, it will identify the sex of the source. And then it changes. And I said, why does it change? And he said, testosterone is a powerful thing, as far as we know. Anyway, that's the thing doing a thing that is pretty sophisticated. And if it gets better and better, can it replace him? But then he's a very distinguished doctor. He's given his life to it. It's fulfilling. He works hard. He's imparted that. I know him well, but I know his daughters better. I had 2 of them in class. And they are wonderful human beings. And they have had him and his wife to emulate. Is there going to be a life like that available for a fellow like that? And that's a very high order thing. What about that? We still going to need excellent doctors?
Well, presumably he does more than just read EKGs.
He does,
so
yeah.
There's other aspects of the job that the computers are not doing yet. One thing that we haven't done is advanced as quickly on the robotics front as we have on the large language model front. And this has taken people aback because there was this idea that automation would come for the low voltage electricians who crawl around in attics and install security systems before it came from what we consider human creative types, such as writing and art and image generation and things like that. But in fact, we don't yet have the capability to have embodied AI walking around doing all the sorts of things a doctor may do beyond just reading the data. And we do have these large language models that are calling into question the future of jobs in areas like graphical design or at least middling levels of journalists and things like that. So people who weren't in the field are still struggling with this. But a lot of the things you mentioned about the great humanity of that doctor's profession would probably also apply to the great artisans who lost all their jobs to various sorts of industrial automation in the 20th century. So this is a problem that's important, but it's not unique to AI.
Huh. Did you used the word yet twice. Do you think that robotics is going to become so competent that they could make a little being in the form of my granddaughter to sit on my lap and talk to me the way she does and move the way she does?
Absolutely, I would say.
Ugh,
Yeah.
that's good.
And we have to remember that it wouldn't be a human. It would still be something other. And that's one of the great issues with artificial intelligence. People talk about existential risks, but I don't think there's an existential risk. I think the risk is essentialist. We could lose who we are as humans if we're surrounded by agents that are not human, that we grow up and we fail to end up distinguishing. We can lose ourselves in a world of these other minds that are more lucid than our own, that we don't quite understand what we are here for.
So our granddaughter and our grandson, and before them our children, we regard as magical beings, awesome things that are unto themselves, right?
As you should, that's proper.
You can really only serve them. You take delight from them, but you are in their service by nature. Also, they're a lot of trouble. So you could make a thing that was very hard to distinguish from them that wouldn't be a lot of trouble. Would that be good for us, Jordan?
No, I think that'd be really bad for us.
John thinks it's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it'll be bad for us, and I think maybe it'll also turn out to be boring. So the real skill, and this is just the kind of thing perhaps that these statistical models would be capable of, would be finding that line where the child is delightful because somewhat troublesome and challenging, but not so troublesome and challenging that you would consider canceling your subscription to the software updates that kept it going. And I think that'd be particularly bad for us for two reasons. One, because we wouldn't have to grow in virtue. Because I know exactly the places where I would tune my robot child to behave in a different way from my child. Most of these circumstances surrounding bedtime transitions, right? Those are the hard things with little kids because they're hard for little kids. The whole world is changing around them, and they want to fight that change. Or if all bets are off now, if we've left the dinner table, there are a lot of other interesting things I could be doing too. So the robot would go straight to the bathroom and start brushing its teeth, and it would definitely wash its hands before touching the couches, and it would be interesting and witty the whole time. And the reason that would be bad for me in the first place would be because I wouldn't have to become a better dad. But the second reason, which I think is related and is the most insidious, is that there would be made visible in our culture, made visible in our society, the fantasy of other persons as beings at our disposal, as beings who exist in order to provide the behavior that we want to consume, because we'd be paying for it. And so this kind of consumerism of the human person, or of something that the apparently human and the apparently personal, I think that would be really devastating to us. We already know, we can already know, because we already, it's rife in Disney movies, and the sort of the bad parent who treats the child as a trophy. There are cultural tropes, the trophy wife, the sort of the beauty queen parent, the father who yells at his kid because he missed the basket. When parents begin to see their children as extensions of the parent's accomplishment, which is actually a very tempting thing, things go very wrong. We don't then exist to be at their service. They exist to be extensions of our action. And that's entirely appropriate to tools. It's entirely appropriate to the machines that we make. In fact, the better that the machines that are most purely extensions of our action, such that we find it wondrous to see them in operation and to see them operated, are musical instruments. The musical instrument, it has capacities and functions of its own, but those functions are taken up into the creative expression of the artist. And someone who can play a violin really well knows how to use that violin just right to generate just this beautiful sound. And we love to go watch that accomplishment. But we really wouldn't want to do that if it weren't a violin, but it were a child or something that seemed like a child.
Ooh.
And the violinist must submit to the limitations of the violin. But if you're subscribing to a service that provides you with the behavioral adaptations of your in-house companion robot, then you get to be a violinist playing an apparent person. And that's, I think that would be very bad for us.
Huh. I had a student over for dinner last night at senior dinner, and he's our concert master and first violinist, and he's very capable. And his teacher thinks that he can be an orchestral violinist in one of the great orchestras. And he knows that's very hard. I have learned how they're chosen, because I know the guy who conducts the North Carolina Symphony, and he told me about this one time, and I've tested it a time or two. It's how do they do it? Because there's this claim that there's racism in classical music. Apparently, to get a chair in an important orchestra, there might be 40 to 60 people audition, and they're usually a committee of 4 to 6 who choose. And when they audition, they're behind a screen. Nobody can see them. This man's name is Grant Llewellyn, this conductor of this orchestra. Interesting man. I said, and so the 4 to 6 can tell. He said, oh yeah. He said, there's usually a consensus. I said, highly skilled musicians, all playing very well, and people can hear and tell who's the best. He said, yeah, usually. I said, amazing, isn't it? And so this young man is aware of that, and he said, I probably can't do it. And I said, yeah, you should try. I said, don't wreck your life over it, because, you could try for years and retire as a busboy. He's very smart, very, very fine young man. I said, but give her a whirl. He said, oh, I'm gonna. Yeah, anyway, I like that. And and he told me about, sorry, you just sparked this recollection, and I'm saying it because it's interesting. He plays an Amati. One of our trustees gave us some very fancy instruments. Amati is, I guess, second to Stradivarius. And I said, what's different about them? And he said, the great ones, 200, 300 years old. And by the way, they've never been dropped, or real experts would know. I've held a Stradivarius, and I refused to hold it, and I was made to hold it by the lady who owned it, or was lent to her because she's a great musician. She said, I'm seated, and she said, here, you hold it. I said, I will not hold it. And she said, why? And I said, if I drop it, it's a decisive event in life. And there's nobody around here to forgive me for that, whereas I could forgive somebody else. And she said, you have to hold it. She said, what kind of man are you? You get a chance to hold the Stradivarius, you won't drop it. She said, hold it. I did. And, just for a minute, I gave it back to her as quick as I could. And And, she's, at the time she was 18, she's a very major violinist in the world. And she carries that thing around and travels with it, and worthy of it. She plays so well. So this young man last night I was talking to, I said, what's different? And he said, it doesn't sound as good to the musician. It projects better. Sounds better to everybody else. I said, so you have to tune yourself to the instrument. He said, yeah, and it takes time. I've been playing it for a year and a half. I said, but the college owns it. You don't. He said, no. He said, I have to go back to my regular one often. And that's not as good once I've come to understand what this one is actually saying. So he tunes himself to the instrument some. But as you say, the instrument can't perform without him and great skill and ability. It's in its essence, I guess, for it to be hard to play. And that's why it's a test for us, where these other things that you're warning about, they won't be hard to play. Now, John suggested, and Jordan has made the case in a place or two that I know, that if there are things around us that are hard to distinguish from us, it might change our attitude toward human things. Go on about that for a minute, please.
If we're in a world where AI might be considered sentient or human, regardless of whether or not it is, Jordan and I have spoken about whether it can be, and that's an interesting academic discussion. But if you're in a world where there's at least a possibility, then the new people growing up, if their nanny robot also can tell stories about their grandparents as a little child, because it's an ancient part of the family, and it is now has this memory of the entire family trailing through it, then looking at that as just a machine stops being an option. And we might have different relationships with these new minds that we're creating. And I don't know that we've ever experienced this. I mean, it's possible there were other hominids around, and maybe the way we handled it was slaughtering them all. But in this day and age, we wouldn't slaughter these AI creations of ours. But how would it change us? I think that's an open question. Maybe we would work it out, but maybe we wouldn't.
Of course, there is a lot of slaughtering of human beings these days.
Right. And then, of course, these AI wouldn't just be the nanny robot. It would also be the assassin robot and the soldier robot, and they'd become weapons of war, and there you go.
Go ahead.
Well, I was about to start talking about more robots, but I realized we were on nanny robots. And,
Yeah.
and I had a thought about the nanny robots as you were talking.
By the way, to a child, a nanny robot and a war robot might be hard to distinguish.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an interesting thing I read about in someone did some kind of sociological study where they had groups of children in the United States and various other countries, and the children were invited to draw a protector, a family protector. And the American kids drew robots bristling with guns and missiles and patrolling the boundaries of the house. And the Korean kids drew their mother. So that shows something.
Yeah.
And perhaps there's something that's there in Korea that is less visible in children's experience, or at least their way of thinking about protection in the United States. With the nanny robot, a robot that has a history that's longer than the lifetime of any particular human being, raises this interesting question of the accuracy of family history, because we all tell stories about our families. We mix them up, we get them wrong. Then there are the stories we want told about ourselves. And if I'm paying $15,000 a year for some nanny robot, leasing the robot and paying for the software downloads, maybe I also want that company for an extra $5,000 to allow me to curate the nanny robot's family memory, so that certain elements of my life, but not others, can be passed on to future generations. And so that kind of control, not only over the sort of behavior that I want to consume from my child robot and my friend robot and maybe even my spouse robot, but control also over the way that my story is told. I think that's also very dangerous for us.
Honor. So I have to erupt.
Yeah.
Honor is very important. Also, the classics are clear. It's not the highest order good because it depends so much on the quality of the person who gives it. The delight of a friend. I assert to everybody watching this, but they can tell by now for themselves, these are two very high quality individuals. They live their life in a serious way. And so if they think something of one is pleased. If you take a being that knows more than they know and is quicker than they are, and it says what you've taught it to say, it's very corrupting of one if he thinks that's honor. And people know that. I mean, what I just said is from both Aristotle and Plato and all of Aristotle, Plato, and Cicero, and most of the rest of them. The great philosophers know that. But everybody knows that. Everybody knows if you're honored by somebody, but you're the cause of it, or some interest of theirs is the cause of it, and it's not a real reflection of something meritorious in you, that's not honor. And so one thing you're saying is it won't be hard to contrive very elaborate systems of honor for one. And we do fall prey, we humans, to that sometimes. That's one of your themes. It's an intensification of a problem that already exists. Amazing. So, talk about the political effects of this for a minute. I guess that's mostly my field. But Winston Churchill was very worried about things like this all his life. He saw a bunch of people slaughtered on a battlefield in Sudan, and he was horrified by it. He was 24 years old, wrote beautifully about it. And then, 35 years later, roughly, he wrote an essay called Mass Effects on Modern Life. It's profound. It's one of his most profound essays. Another one, 50 Years Hence, written about the same time in his life. In Mass Effects, the point is, he says, we have books now. Everybody's got books. Books this where we are today is surrounded by a bunch of precious books that the college has collected and uses. And they're original and they're valuable. But all of these books you can get in a paperback or on your iPad or PC cheap. And Churchill wonders, do people read them? When they were more precious, did we read them more? And those are mass effects, right? This is a vast mass effect. Huge. It'll do things for us, and instead of us, that we could only do for ourselves through serious effort. Is that just going to overcome us?
It could.
It could.
So a most gloomy assessment might be that it would. And you gave me that essay on Mass Effect and 50 Years Hence to read. And I was really struck when Churchill talked about the possibility of artificial persons. And he imagines them being kind of grown under glass or something. But we could think of artificially intelligent robots. And he says this kind of thing would be more appropriate to the Soviets because in the Soviet Union, human beings are as he saw it, are functionaries within this vast machine of production. And yes, they all own the means of production, and that was the whole point. But he says, but the way they live is they've become part of the factory, whether it's political or industrial. And so he says that's kind of it would be a sort of Soviet thing to do. But he says it would be alien. Of course, he's speaking rhetorically here. But it would be alien to the kind of civilization that he hopes for in the West, in which the individual is valued. We live in a highly individualistic society, in which the reduction of persons to being mere functionaries or resistance to functionary reduction of persons is part of our cultural inheritance. It's part of our popular culture. The individuality is even used as a commercial selling point. Don't be like everyone else. Buy this product that we want everyone to buy. But with artificial intelligence in a world fully customized to my expectations, my needs, my perceived needs, my desires, my whims, I walk in the house, the temperature adjusts, the right music comes on, the lights dim in just the room I want. My son's music is canceled out by contrary sound waves, so that I don't have to hear it coming through the wall. That kind of world is the world of an individual, but it's the world of an individual in which everything else has become a functionary in the service of my desires. And this is what the early Christian tradition calls pride. So there's a way of each of us becoming our own version of Churchill's assessment of the Soviet civilization, where each of us becomes the party, or each of us becomes the measure of all other things. We each become our own little tyrant, but invisibly, because we don't have to bump up against the rough edges of others' failure to service our wants, because the AI is there to do it for us. The AI is there to mediate between us and the other little tyrants in the world. And maybe eventually we don't want them in our world. Maybe eventually we want the kids to live in a little house down the street, served by the robo-nanny, while our own robot children service us. So that's the darkest potential interpretation where...
Ooh, let me make it darker.
All right.
Rule is natural to human beings. And if we're crippled by this submersion in our wants immediately satisfied, we'll be prey. Churchill compares, in Mass Effects in Modern Life, he compares the Soviet society to the anthill. Not the bee. They can't make any honey. And that, you see, in other words, if we're weak, someone's going to rule us, somebody who's stronger, because there is a kind of person who just wants to do that. It's the reason why the single most important thing about a government, the first distinction you make, is, do the people who rule with the permission of those ruled? That turns out to be a hard test to meet. Not everywhere does. There's arguments that it's not met in this country as well as it used to be. But that's the point. In other words, you don't do anything to anybody unless they tell you you can. If you have a population of people who are used to having everything done for them by a machine, those people will likely be weak, and then somebody will rule them. And that's, are we free to speak however we please today? Maybe not as much as we have been in the past. You were about to say something about all.
Yeah, I just want to inject a little bit of hope here.
Good. Time to do it.
I'd like to say that there's maybe we won't succumb to the darker angels of our nature. Maybe there are places where these computer tools can help us create. They allow people who don't know how to do video production to generate videos now. People who can't draw can now generate images. They can take what's in their head and they can make images of them with these tools, and the tools will only get better. There's a lot of uses for generating writing other than cheating on your college assignments. You could also be a poor writer and actually get something out there that's in your head. And this could fulfill our desires as humans. This could allow us to be more creative in the world and bring more beauty and joy to our lives.
Yeah, I'd like to speak on behalf of that with an anecdote, which is that in 2012, I was working on my dissertation. And as most of my friends were later in retrospect, I was feeling a bit depressed and gloomy, deep in the dissertation in a library with no windows. And it was at that time that that a bunch of movies and cheap novels about zombies came out, and I read a couple of them on a lark. And like Edgar Rice Burroughs, when he read the Pulp Fiction of his day, I thought to myself, I bet I could write something better. But it turned out I couldn't. I'm not that great at writing some things. So I decided to take Victorian literature, which was in the public domain, and reassemble it into a novel, which I still work on and off, usually when I'm procrastinating from grading at the end of the semester. And the interesting thing about that is that I have assembled a bit of a story, but I've also learned a lot by reading these other better novels written by real writers. And so their writing, even though it becomes grist for the mill, as it were, their writing challenges me as a thinker, as a creative mind. And so I can see a space for what Dr. Seifert is talking about, of this kind of, by interacting with ChatGPT, a writer is interacting with something of what I said before, like the landscape of human creative writing. And there's something interesting in that. There's some potential for bad writers like myself to try their hand at something and see what they can do.
Yeah, entirely new genres of interactive fiction and interactive video can be developed this way. And there's plenty of ways technology has made our lives easier that we don't complain about. So
I think, John, you are fond of saying that if you attempt to make a thing for yourself, you will end up understanding it better. That's part of your point.
yes.
Yeah. In other words, to engineer. John is a great defender of engineering understood in the context of the liberal arts, which is one of the reasons he's happy to work here, and we're happy to have him. So that's right. In other words, you can grow to. I want to leave everybody with a few distinctions myself, and one of them is let's say that there's a nanny that's artificial and extremely good and kind and helps with your kids. That's a valuable thing. It would be wrong wantonly to destroy that thing. All the work that went into it. It'd be like breaking one of those violins. Any violin, really, but one of those old ones especially. And so what the classics teach us is try to understand each thing for what it is. And a human child is a divine gift. We didn't make it. Every living thing grows of its own, contains the principle of growth within itself. You can plant pine cones and try to turn them into oak trees all day long, and you'll never get it done. You have to change their nature. They have a nature. It's divine, too. So the point is, whatever teaches us to appreciate the human child would also mean that an artifact, like a nanny robot would have a dignity. Not the same, not as high. It's certainly true that if you make it yourself, you can do more with it than if it's a gift to you from outside. But still, those things would have a dignity, and they would lose that dignity. And so would the human child if you think nothing has a dignity except how you use it. I think we have to. I also think we're going to have to we're going perforce to get better at these distinctions, what makes a human and what's not, because the confusion is all around us now. I protest about education today that the debate, almost the entire debate, it's about what we do to the kids to get them the way we want. it's education is understood, and it's across the political divide. Not uniformly, but it certainly crosses the political divide, political parties. They think when they talk about outcomes, ultimately what they mean is it the kind of person we want to make? And the we want is crucial. So I fear that and think that that way of thinking makes us prey to the worst forms of the artificial intelligence outcomes. So I want you both to make a prediction. And then I have an inspiring quote so we don't end without great hope. What's your prediction about all this?
I think the human spirit will out, and we will use it for wonderful creative ends. And we will learn more about ourselves in the process and be able to make these distinctions that you mentioned.
Okay.
I actually agree with that. I think there will be great challenges, and I think there will be the possibilities for a kind of dilution of our humanity, as I've described. But I also think that won't be the end of it, because we carry within ourselves a horizon that actually is wider than what we think we want, what we can say. That the wants, the desires we can articulate fall short of the richness of the desires that we actually have. And so that will always propel us beyond what we thought we wanted. There's some really good shows on Netflix these days. It didn't all end with 1970s action shows. So I think, people find a way.
Awesome. That is, by the way, aren't you guys great? So here's my hopeful thing. Winston Churchill wrote this in 1935. Hitler is looming, and it's in 50 years hence, which might be the best thing he ever wrote, but there's so much that he wrote that it's hard to say. He says, imagine a race of people 15 or 16 generations hence or more, and he says they can travel anywhere they want, including interplanetary. They can live as long as they want. They know things that we could never learn. They enjoy pleasures wider than we can have. What would be the good of all that to them? What would they know more than we know about the answers to the simple questions? Why are we here? What are we for? It is the persistence of these questions that give us the best assurance that all will be well. So you both just said a form of that. That is to say, we're human. That's not going to go away. We will not be satisfied. We cannot be satisfied by a life in which everything is done for us and we can do nothing. So take heart, everybody. Hillsdale College is going to carry on. Thank you.